Bippity Boppity Boo, my lovelies, I have a treat for you. If you were with me last year when my channel had a different name, you'll remember that we had a visit from the one and only Scary Fairy Godmother. Well, I'm delighted to tell you that Scary Fairy, the very lovely Cecily, has some big news. When Cecily dropped in last year, she shared a sneak peek at her upcoming novel, The Ghosts of Nothing, with a reading from the book. Well, The Ghosts of Nothing has now been published, and I'm so proud of Cecily. It's an incredible achievement. Cecily is a passionate storyteller, and she's embraced and explored the fairy realm for many years now. Her voice has become like a good friend to many people, including myself, both inspiring and strangely reassuring. If you've watched her videos, you might know what I mean. It's like a little oasis in the midst of our mad world. Well, to celebrate the release of her first novel, let's take a listen to the lady herself. So if you've ever wondered about the woman behind Scary Fairy Godmother, you're in luck. I am tickled pink to introduce you to Cecily.
Hello everyone, and thanks for having me, Kitty. My name is Cecily, but on YouTube I'm better known as Scary Fairy Godmother. On my channel I narrate spooky fairy stories, the kind that might have been told in hushed tones hundreds of years ago in tiny villages across the world. Today, stories like these aren't told so much as, say, ghost stories or tales of alien abductions, which have in many ways taken the place of the fairy stories of old. But I think there's something special about fairy stories, something we should be careful not to lose. While ghost stories connect us with our past, our ancestors, and our fears around death, and speculations about aliens send our imaginations floating into the dark sea of outer space, the fairies are creatures very much of this world, beings like us, but not us. Mysterious neighbors that haunt the world's wild places and infuse them with consciousness, with intelligence, with magic. In many ways, modernity has stripped the mystery and the magic from our lives and from nature. In the eyes of science, we are mere bodies, mechanical things without a spirit, without a soul. But in fairy stories, you find a profound disagreement with that hypothesis. Fairy stories remind us that not only do we have spirits, but so do the trees, the mushrooms and the mountains, the wells, the rivers and seas. They see and they hear and they think, and they know things that we do not. If you've ever walked in an ancient forest, it's easy to understand why the people of the past might have felt there was an intelligence in the wood, a spirit, or perhaps many. These mysterious hidden places in the natural world reflect the mysterious hidden places inside all of us. There's so much we don't understand about the world and about ourselves. And I think exploring and celebrating fairy stories is a way in, a door to that mystery, the enchanted part of the world, and the enchanted part of all of us. On my channel, I tell modern tales of fairy encounters just like the ones people told in the past, but alive and happening in the here and now. It's my way of contributing to that old and proud tradition, and adding a bit of the mystery and magic of the fairies to my viewers' lives. A little about me. I first became interested in the fairies as a teenager after reading Tolkien for the first time. I think many others have had the same experience. I was fascinated by his depiction of the elves. I was especially drawn to the elves of Mirkwood in The Hobbit. I found their secret forest meetings around campfires that disappeared and then reappeared absolutely captivating, much more so than the stately and regal elves of The Lord of the Rings. I later discovered the mythology of the Will-o'-the-Wisp, those strange floating fairy lights that appear in forests or bogs or foggy fields and leave travelers astray. I'm sure Tolkien was probably inspired by these stories. I'm certainly inspired by them. There's something about that light in the darkness that sparks the imagination. A light that could be your salvation if you're a lost traveler, or your doom, or any of a number of things in between. For this reason, the Will-o'-the-Wisp has become one of my favorite of all the fairies, and perhaps in some ways I'm following one, always, in the work that I do. I decided to start my channel on a bit of a whim. I'm a fiction writer, and that sense of mystery and danger and wonder in fairy stories is something I'm always trying to capture, even if it sometimes remains out of reach. Before I started my channel, I would listen to narrated stories on YouTube in the hopes of finding inspiration for my fiction. But the sorts of stories I really wanted to hear, fairy stories, were next to impossible to find at that time. So, as I said on a bit of a whim, I thought, if no one else is telling these stories, maybe I should. It's been a happy surprise to me that the channel has since built a following, and I've been especially gratified to learn that other writers and artists come to my channel for inspiration for their own work. If there's one thing fairy stories do well, it's stir the imagination. I've written and shared some fairy fiction of my own on the channel, modern retellings of old and somewhat obscure fairy stories, and look forward to sharing more in the future. And I'm excited to say I recently completed my first novel. The novel is, of course, a fairy story about a girl from a notoriously haunted town who discovers it's fairies and not ghosts that are the real source of the town's troubles. Drawing on folklore and my own imagination, I explore the fairy world in this novel, or what I think that strange other world could be like. And I hope readers will follow me as they might a will-o'-the-wisp on this adventure. For those who are interested, you can sign up to my mailing list at scaryfairygodmother.com to receive updates about this novel, some sneak peeks, and an announcement when it becomes available. It's free to join, and you can unsubscribe at any time if you change your mind. I'd like to leave you with a brief excerpt from a poem by Sir William Davenant about the Will-o'-the-Wisp, and then with a brief excerpt from my novel. First, the poem. Benighted travelers now lose their way, whom the Will-o'-the-Wisp bewitches. About and about he leads them astray, through bogs, through hedges and ditches. And now on to the excerpt from my novel, The Ghosts of Nothing. Fairies, a voice boomed, and the whole world seemed to stop. Jack and Kit stood frozen in the middle of the destroyed room, the cat suddenly nowhere to be seen. Grandmother stood in the doorway in her nightgown, holding her wrought iron bell in one hand. Nellie's mouth dropped open. Fairies? Did Grandmother just say fairies? Fairies, Grandmother said again, forcefully, and dropped a bag of red berries on the floor. Jack and Kit stood perfectly still, eyes locked on Grandmother like a pair of wolves. You know our name, Kit said, in strangely accented English. Yes, Grandmother said. I know your name. I know what you are. And I know what that means. That was from my forthcoming book, The Ghosts of Nothing. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much, Kitty, for having me on your podcast. I'll end the way I end most of my YouTube videos. This has been a visit from your Scary Fairy Godmother.
Isn't she just lovely? And what a rare treat taking a peek behind Scary Fairy Godmother and learning what has inspired her in her work and her understanding of fairies. I particularly found Cecily's perception of Will-o'-the-Wisp to be really intuitive and astute. Will-o'-the-Wisp has a real haunting quality, and it's a great example of the dual nature of the fairy. Cecily has been so generous in sharing a little bit of her new novel, The Ghosts of Nothing. It sounds amazing, doesn't it? I could happily listen to her read all day long. If you haven't visited Scary Fairy Godmother's YouTube channel, do yourself a favour and drop in today. You'll be so glad you did. I'll leave a link in the notes below to Scary Fairy Godmother's YouTube channel, and there you can also find all the links to find out more or purchase a copy of her new book, The Ghosts of Nothing. A big thanks to Cecily for sharing a little of herself with us. It's been an absolute delight. I hope you've enjoyed this very special episode of Fairy Encounters. But before you go, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't, and that way you won't miss any future videos. And check out the one on screen now. I think you'll love it. Until next time, stay curious and be kind. Cheerio!